Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Hello there, healthcare human. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so the title of this week's podcast is kind of the main point of this entire episode: alternatives to pushing through. I think I have to share the origin of this title, which is in this peer support group that I'm a co-facilitator of that is supporting family physicians who live with chronic illness and disability. This was one of the topics that came forward. And ever since that was the way, it was the way that we phrased boundary setting. We're like, okay, but what do we mean by boundary setting? Like, what's the specific aspect of boundary setting that we want to make sure we discuss and share what's hard about it and what's helpful about it. And just this notion in healthcare that we have of constantly needing to push through. You hear all the time, about resilience and having grit. And those are fabulous qualities, by the way. We hear about being persistent. We hear about never giving up. We hear about being hard workers. We hear about being overworkers and so busy, and all those things almost being a badge of honor. And what I'd name is that there's absolutely a diminishing return if that is the only ethos that you live your life by. It's an inhuman story to say that no matter what the situation is, you should always push through. That no matter what, it is always beneficial to you and those around you if you push through and keep going and never give up. And I know that seems strange. It's there's the poster, never give up. And a little bit it's what we mean when we say not to give up, when we say to push through, right? What does that actually look like in your life? Because what I see, what I used to and occasionally feel tempted to practice, and what I see practiced as the dominant culture that's celebrated and praised inside of healthcare for sure, is to overdo, is to do more than your body has capacity for, to do more than you want to, that you have energy for. Try and cram in more than you can do in a way that feels satisfying. So you leave things undone, you leave things half done, you do them all and then you don't get enough sleep. You do them all, but you forget to pee. That's the thing. Pushing through absolutely has its place, and a good sprint and a good efforting of work well done is incredibly satisfying. So I am not saying that we should never do anything ever. You get to decide for yourself what you want to do. But speaking for myself, I enjoy working to a certain point under my capacity, as I've talked about many times. I enjoy being creative and creating just for myself. I enjoy putting effort into things I do and getting a reward back for them. I absolutely enjoy all those qualities. I would argue, I don't actually know the fancy definitions of things like resilience and grit, but I would imagine that a piece of those includes how you could actually be resilient and have a sustainable approach to something includes knowing when not to put 110% into something. A piece of it has to be that you are strategic about where you put your time and energy and effort, right? But we can really struggle, especially if we have been in hyper productivity, hustle culture, working to the max, thinking the only thing and the only reason that you're worth anything to anyone is if you are working a maximum amount of time. As Brene Brown would say, hustling for your worthiness. You are sometimes can't even think about what the alternatives could be. And I see this a lot. So what happens is someone's I'm so busy, I can't stop. I'm so busy, I can't stop. There's so much to do, but how am I supposed to stop? Everything's so important. I'm too busy to figure out how to be less busy. I'm just on this hamster wheel, on. And they get to a point where either they do really have enough, and then they're I'm quitting everything and burning it all to the ground. Or they don't choose that consciously, but their body chooses it for them. Like you've heard multiple times on this podcast, multiple examples of folks where their body chooses for them to slow them down, to say, stop pushing through. You've pushed through so much that it has hurt me enough that now I am forcing you to stop, right? And to be clear, I'm not saying everyone who's been on this podcast who's had medical conditions is because they overworked. No. Like there's specific ones on this podcast where it was about overwork, right? Like I'm thinking of the example Frances May Harden when she was talking about having like a zillion ulcers, stress-induced ulcers. And like that was like she attributed that to overworked, just like as a specific example, right? So sometimes it's your body that stops you. Sometimes it is you that finally stops you and says, okay, the only alternative to overworking is to working not at all, right? You got to push through or you have to quit and give up completely, right? And so I just wanted to practically offer the other alternatives on the menu. Quitting completely, by the way, is a fabulous option. Overworking, as long as you can, is another, I will say, fabulous option in that it's an option that many people choose and that brings a certain amount of benefits of various kinds to your life. It's valid as well. I'm not here to shame if you're like, listen, lady, you keep talking about overworking, but I am choosing to overwork. I am aware I'm overworking. I can tell I'm running on fumes and it's what I'm doing. And I'm like, you go. Okay. But those are only two options on the menu. Are you aware there are options in between? That's what I want to talk about. And I was inspired to do this podcast now, not only because I had this title bouncing in my head forever, the alternatives to pushing through, because it just, I don't know, it captures something in my imagination. I love it as a title. But also, if you can kind of hear from my voice, I am recovering from an upper respiratory tract infection. Like, honestly, if you go back through my back catalog, the number of times I have been in some state of upper respiratory tract infection, because I've been recording this podcast for like almost 3 years now. What is happening? I don't know what's happening, but like for almost 3 years now. And I continue to have like daycare / school age children. My goodness. Many a time I have recorded a podcast in this state. So just to say, you can put that on the bingo card if you've been playing along. And I was thinking specifically about how I really deployed all the different alternatives that I am aware of to pushing through as I recovered from this cold, which was particularly bad. Like maybe it was the flu, because at the beginning it was like I could not do much. So I wanted to use examples from this recent recovery that I've gone through as examples of how, in the past, certainly while I was still in training, definitely pre-COVID, this was more like socially acceptable. I would have just like gone full blast, done all of the obligations that I thought I had to do at home, done all the obligations I had to do at work, and just not even worn a mask, and just like pushed and pushed and pushed. And I have done that in the past. I've tried to push through a cold. And my experience in doing that has been I am sicker longer. I end up getting worse coughing symptoms and then stay up all night coughing and then have an even worse next day. And then that becomes a terrible like cough insomnia cycle that can last for weeks. And what I will report to you is that this is day 4 of the cold. And I'm not like doing some prescriptive causative thing. It's possible that even if I had fully pushed through this cold, I would have felt this good by this point. Maybe. But I have a strong suspicion. The reason that even though it was really bad the first day, I have recovered as sort of, I'll say, smoothly and as efficiently as I have. My contribution to that, as well as, I don't know, luck and the particular virus, etc., has been that I have not pushed through, that I have employed alternatives to pushing through as pieces of my cold recovery. I do believe that. And I think that's solid medicine. When you're sick, rest is best is an excellent lyric from a Daniel Tiger song. And I believe in Daniel Tiger. And I think Daniel knows what he's talking about. So those are some of the examples I will use. And then also, I want to link it back to sort of looking back generally on my burnout and overwhelm and overwork recovery, which has been a longer process. I've been documenting it on this podcast, like I said, for almost 3 years. And I was even really doing it for about a year before that. And so wanting to share how these exact same concepts apply to the working environment and how you could consider which of these options on the menu I'm about to provide to you, you could start to deploy more as you consider recovering from if you're feeling like you're a bit burnt out, a bit overwhelmed, or majorly so. So I'm here to provide that menu for you. Okay, so what are the options? I think I'll just list them first. And the thing that's sort of interesting is I've put them in the categories that are also the same categories that we consider if someone is unwell enough, like when a patient comes to me and they are unwell enough that they feel they cannot work anymore. Even in that setting, there are multiple alternatives of what we could do next. So one of the alternatives that many of my patients choose is I feel terrible. I know I'm not showing up as my best. My job performance is definitely suffering. I might get fired soon, but I can't do anything else because the thought of doing less than my absolute 100% plus that I'm giving to this job is I can't even see it. So they continue to push through until their body tells them otherwise or their employer tells them otherwise, right? So that's one of the options, like we already said. Or they could quit, of course. They could just say, I'm out, I quit, and that's it. But if they're coming to me, the options that we have at our disposal when I'm, as their family physician, talking to them about other options to pushing through or completely quitting, the three options are going on a leave. And I'm going to use the word hiatus here because I just learned this term from Sam, my co-facilitator for that peer support group. As I understand, it's a term used in portions of disability culture. And I just think it's a great term. It's sort of a softer term than quitting, and maybe has different connotations than leave, depending on your history with those words, right? So going on hiatus from work is one of the options and then, I'm filling out the papers and I'm saying this person cannot work until a future date, etc. So that's one of the options. That's different from quitting, by the way, right? It's pausing the work until you see if your body can recover. The other two options are modified duties or modified hours, right? And so I'm going to go through each of these three alternatives. Within them, there's actually kind of infinite alternatives of how they can apply, but I like these three big buckets. So if you're looking at your life and you're I know I'm doing too much. I know I'm trying to push through this one big stress in my life, but it's clear from the feedback I'm getting from my body and the universe that I probably need to choose a different alternative. Or maybe it's my life in general, I can tell I'm trying to push through, but it's clear from the feedback I'm getting, from the burnout I'm feeling, from how I'm showing up, something needs to change. Here are your three buckets. Which would you like to choose? Would you like to go on a hiatus? Would you like to go on modified duties? Would you like to go on modified hours? Those are your choices. So let's talk through them. So the first, hiatus, closest to what we think of as quitting and completely pausing something, right? So the equivalent from my most recent example is I started to feel unwell. I had a sore throat. To be honest, the first day I actually did push through. I went to a Dave & Buster's for my son's birthday party, and I honestly was pushing through and a little bit in denial that I was sick. And so I do apologize to everyone who may have received whatever virus I had at that Dave & Buster's. I don't actually feel good about that. I'm just sharing live with you. I was I'm fine. It's fine. Yes, I'm feeling really tired and my throat's really scratchy, but it's probably just from yelling over this very loud, overstimulating environment at Dave & Buster's. But I, in retrospect, had a cold then too. And then the next day, I woke up and I was supposed to go to brunch with my in-laws. And if I'm being honest with all of you on this podcast, I did go to that brunch, but I could tell I was unwell, and I could tell by how spacey I was that it wasn't going well, even though I'd taken some Advil. So when I got home from that brunch, I went to bed. My in-laws came. I had strong socialized obligation feelings, I was supposed to stay with them and stay with them for the duration of the visit. They were not giving me that pressure at all. But by the end of that time, I surrendered to the hiatus of it all. And I took a little hiatus from my weekend, and I slept for 2 hours that morning. I slept from 9:30 to noon, which is a very odd time to be sleeping. And I was very grateful for that. And that was my hiatus, like from my life. So that was like that full hiatus. And even for the rest of the day, lots of lying down, lots of screen time for the kids. Great. We all just took a hiatus from, being whatever vision of a perfectly functioning family we might have in our heads. And instead, we just sort of took a little hiatus and had a little rest party. And that was absolutely what my body needed. My body was saying, don't even try to pretend you don't have this cold. Thank you very much. So that's like the recent example. When I think back on my time recovering from overworking, like generally, definitely the thing that I would put on, I found it easier to put things on hiatus and like pause things versus quitting them and like resigning from them outright. So an example I've given a few times is when my husband was sick. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, and I was on 3 separate boards and an additional 1 to 2 committees. And it was very clear to me I wanted to create more space on my calendar and my life just in case. Like, what if he got really sick? What if I was sort of very seriously solo parenting for a while? And even then I was like, hey, just while he's sick, while he's in active treatment, I'm just going to step away. And then I never went back to any of those things. I just like later realized that they were fine without me. I was absolutely replaceable. It was okay. And when I checked with myself, I did not want to return, though, none of them were negative experiences, but my time in those places was past and I was moving on to other things. And so that hiatus turned into a quit. And sometimes that happens even with patients, doesn't it? Where it's like, it's a hiatus that turns into a quit and they just need that time to like come to the realization that that's what they want to do. I think that's valid, by the way. And so in my case, that was true with these committees as well, right? I also want to name, so like say the idea of taking a full hiatus, like I've done that, even like smaller ones. I talked about doing my summer sabbatical where I took 4 weeks off in a row, which I had not ever done before outside of maternity leaves, which do not count as a hiatus because you pick up another job, which is recovering from pregnancy and like keeping a tiny baby human alive. That's just, you're just transitioned to a different job for a time. But a couple summers ago, I took 4 weeks off straight as my sabbatical. That counts. And that was a wonderful and really informative and enriching experience for me to take a hiatus, even though I wasn't overworking, but just to prove to myself that I could, that my patients would survive, that I would survive, that I didn't need to be working to be worthy, So it can be like that, or even something longer. People take, 3 months, 6 months sabbaticals. Sometimes, depending on your workplace, it's even like a built-in option. Sometimes you have to plan for it if it's not a built-in option, but these things exist. And can be a wonderful way to just disrupt the flow of feeling like you're trapped on that same hamster wheel. There's also like extremely brief, like micro hiatuses you can take. So for example, yesterday I was in clinic and I was feeling better enough, and I had diminished energy, less spoons, if you will, but I felt capable, like I had something to give. And so I decided to go to work and see patients. But I did cancel a lunch meeting that I was planning to have so I could have a break instead. And then in that break, I took a nap. I've actually started napping at work semi-regularly, certainly at times where like maybe I've had not as good a night's sleep, or if I'm recovering from another cold. This one yesterday, I set that timer for 30 minutes. And sometimes I like set the timer for like 10 to 30 minutes. I just lie down on an exam table. I have like a little shawl that I use as a blanket. I turn off the lights, I get really cozy, and I'll set that timer. And sometimes most often it's for like 10 or 15 minutes. And I mostly just like lie there with my eyes closed. And then I won't think I'm going to sleep. And then like, I'll sort of wake up to the alarm. So I've like gone into sort of a mini sleep. Yesterday, I set my alarm for 30 minutes and I definitely like fully fell asleep. I woke up and I'd been drooling. I was like, oh, that was delicious. So like a hiatus can be a long time away from work, but it also can be a nap in the middle of your workday. You can count that as a hiatus. And you see how like that is an alternative to pushing through. Because my default still socially, like if I'm not conscious, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to maybe pause for lunch. But like I am conditioned to be like, grab my lunch, bring it back to my computer, check my inbox as I'm eating lunch. And that's like kind of the culture of my office. It's the culture of almost every office I've ever worked at. And so knowing that there's alternatives to that and like disrupting that flow is something you have to kind of choose intentionally. And I strongly recommend trying it if you haven't. Definitely, there's always work you could be doing. And guess what? It'll still be there and you will be so much more rested. That's the thing. When I started doing these naps in the middle of the day and just disrupting that workflow and that pushing through flow, I actually get a second wind in the afternoon versus before I'd push through and then by the first hour of my afternoon, all the patients started feeling like a little bit more tricky, a little bit more annoying, a little bit more frustrating. And it wasn't the patients, it was me. Patients were just being patients. But I'm like, oh, why is this complicated? Like someone would not have something that wasn't straightforward and I'd be like getting annoyed by it. And that's a good signal for me. Like, Joan, you're reaching the end of your capacity. You're starting to run in the shallow end of your deep pool of energy here if you're starting to get annoyed. And it's really fun to just like have a whole work day, including talking with patients that can be quite challenging and can have lots of meaty trickiness to them and have spicy personalities, and to actually like genuinely not be annoyed by any of them. That I do that not because I'm like a good person, but that happens on days when I have paced myself, when I have rested. And one of the secrets is absolutely the days that I've had a little nap in the middle of the day, or at least a little lie down. Beautiful. That's why I created a whole course about rest called Homecoming. You can it's like a self-paced course you can get from my website. And the main practice in that entire course is lie down for 10 minutes and do nothing. Have a rest practice. And so having that as a part of my life I've continued to practice what I preach, and it is fabulous. So that is the hiatus category. You can make it big, you can make it small. You can take a nap, or you can leave the country for months at a time. You get to decide what that hiatus looks like. It is useful if you plan a hiatus that is a genuine hiatus from not only the work you're doing, but also the pace of work that you are getting burnt out at. So I do see people where they take a sabbatical and then they throw themselves with the same fervor and pace into something else. And maybe that can still, I'm not saying that's not a sabbatical. It's a change, it's a difference. And sometimes that can be very restorative in its own way. And if ultimately part of what your healing journey needs to be, and this is a conversation to have between you and your body. I have no idea. But if you notice that you are still getting very, very tired and very, very grumpy and very, very depleted, and you kind of hate everyone, and you're having some of those signs of burnout, maybe what you really need a hiatus from is the hustle at all. And that is very challenging to do and a beautiful process to flow with, and one that I continue to flow with as I get excited about projects like the podcast and new ventures that are going on. I invite myself constantly to be taking steps back, pausing, mini hiatuses at least from things, leaving space around things, and not bringing the old try hard, do the most, do 150% energy really to any new thing I'm doing. Even if I'm really enjoying it and want to do it a lot, making sure even then I'm taking breaks from it. So that's one of the alternatives to pushing through, is taking a hiatus. The second bucket is modified duties. So the example I wanted to offer was that on 2 days ago on Monday, I had that's one of my creative days. So I don't do any clinical work. Instead, I do different kinds of creative things like coaching stuff. That's when my creating space coaching course runs, is on Monday afternoon, for example. But I also do things for me, I have a therapy appointment that I go and see my therapist. I see friends. I'm out of the house in various ways. And so my modified duties for Monday, because I still was quite sick, feeling better than the day before, definitely had a nap in the middle of the day, but I just canceled all of my out of house stuff, right? And this is a common patient related one. It's I'm going to work from home, but not in the office. And that's a way you can have modified duties that might support your recovery from various conditions, right? And so I did a little extra work from home basically and canceled a bunch of things. So I didn't cancel my entire day because I didn't feel like I needed to. It felt okay. But I was strategic about, where I spent my spoons. If you remember the spoon therapy the spoon theory episode. And that felt really good. So that's sort of a very specific example. In terms of the burnout recovery piece, I mean, honestly, the whole project and what has been some of the richest work I've done has been a continual modification of my duties in terms of like really redefining over and over again for myself what it is that I do when I'm practicing medicine. Because as you know, if you've listened to more than one episode of this podcast, we are invited to have all sorts of wild, conflicting, impossible job descriptions for ourselves in healthcare. And really letting go some of those inhuman stories one at a time, and sort of being in the constant process of creating space in my mind and in my life to really focus in on like, what are the core duties I want to do? What about this job means the most to me? What is the most energy generating parts of my work? And how can I really let go and stop doing the rest? That is what I mean by like a modification of duty. So specific example is how I continue to remind myself to fire myself from the job of trying to control anyone else's thoughts, feelings, and actions. So a specific place I have done this that I've spoken about before is how I document patient encounters. So I used to document in a way where they were hyper detailed, would take me a long time. I'd have to stay up late into the night. And the reasons for that is because I thought doing so would prevent someone from suing me, would mean that if my colleagues looked at my notes, they wouldn't judge me for them. And so those motivations for doing my notes were inhuman stories where I thought if I had enough detailed notes in my notes, then I could prevent other people from thinking things about me, feeling ways about me, and doing things to me like suing me. So when I let go of those stories and instead just went back to like, well, what's the actual essence, the energy neutral, at least if not energy generating reason why I do a note for my patients, and realizing that though I said it's for my patients, it's really for me. So when I document, I'm documenting with enough clarity to have some semblance of remembering what happened in that encounter for me. Excuse me, the cough lingers. As well as at this point also for the resident that works with me, nurse practitioners that work with me. So for other members of my team to have a general sense of what happened, right? And finding ways to do that, and quitting the rest of that job. So I've modified the duty of charting down to the kind of duty I actually want to do, right? Another way that we put this is like quiet quitting. So like a lot of us are doing way, way more than what we're paid for. A lot of us are doing way, way more than what our job description even really is. That recent conversation I had with Padre Gotuma where he's saying like, stay in your lane. Like what if we simply practice medicine? What if we simply did the core work that we value, that our patients actually value for us for anyway, and stayed out of the lanes of other things that actually are not in our control, that aren't even really our area of expertise, and focused in on the part of our job that's really ours to do. That's been a fabulous process, and I continue to do that. And it, informs most of the episodes of this podcast, is all the different ways I've modified my duties, firing myself from thinking of myself of having to be the medical expert of the world, firing myself from being a people pleaser, an ongoing healing process, but like not making it my job to make someone not angry at me, like those sorts of things, right? Like when I stop doing all those extra tasks, the actual tasks I have to do are a lot simpler and a lot neater. It's like, the modified duty of like, don't lift over 5 pounds. That's like a common thing on functional abilities forms. If you know. And so like, how do I make any given task just the core things that mean that I'm not ever lifting more than 5 pounds? How can I really break down any task that it isn't actually that heavy? It is simply the task itself, right? The other way even to think of this is literally like, can I do every task at a 5 instead of trying to do it at a 10 out of 10? Everything is like a 5 out of 10. If that feels too scary, B minus, right? Which would be what? 7 out of 10? I don't know. But like mediocrity, baby. You heard me talk about it. Like really getting to the essence of the thing that means it's done and it's off my plate. So Patient forms, another classic example. So I've modified, ironically, the forms in which I write about modified duties for others. I have modified my emotions towards it. My duty to myself towards it is the main thing I'm doing is reporting the news. I'm reporting facts that have already existed. I write them down. I put it off. I have fired myself from the job of re-adjudicating if I did a good job. I fired myself from the burden of thinking if I don't do this perfectly, the insurance company won't approve it. I do it with integrity, so I tell the truth. I don't leave stuff off that is true. I write down the things that I'm aware of. I write down the things that I know. I send it off to the insurance company. And that is definitely a 5 out of 10 versus the 10 out of 10 where I was like rewriting things and making sure the wording was perfect and over explaining things, thinking that if I didn't do that, my patients wouldn't be approved. And then realizing, ironically, the ones it actually matters more which insurance company you're sending it to or which branch of the government, and they must have some frequency that they approve or deny. And it actually is not in my hands at all to decide who gets disability insurance or not. That's not actually my part of the job. I'm the reporter, the medical fact reporter. And like that job is way less stressful than the deciding who deserves to make income while they recover from an illness. That job must be soul crushing because it's a horrible moral distress idea, isn't it? And maybe just as a society, we could rethink how we do that, honestly. Please. Anyways, all right. And so then the third bucket, modified hours. So this happens a lot, right? So like with patients, I talk about returning to work especially, and lots of people want to return to work full force, and they're like, just put me back, full duties, full hours. And they've been off for some time, for something serious enough for them to be away from work for some time. And I do, though I always do like co-creative, patient-centered, patient value directed care, I do strongly recommend they consider some amount of like a graduated return to work. And I say you can do the modified duties way, which most patients, unless there's something very concrete, like I can stay at home versus going to the office, or I can like do a desk job instead of being out in the field, like that kind of thing. Most people do not like doing this because most workplaces are not very helpful and very persnickety about like defining the 5-pound versus 10-pound weight limits, and it usually causes more stress than it's worth. And so a way that can feel more concrete, if the idea of like redefining your work sounds very overwhelming because you are too overwhelmed right now, perhaps just starting with modified hours, because that's when I find most patients can get their head around, and most patients can see a way that it actually feels good for them. So like for patients, for some workplaces and some kinds of work, it's really nice to start with half shifts. Say they work 8-hour shifts usually. So it's like start going in 4 hours and then you get to go home and you don't have to deal with your boss that never lets you take breaks and is horrible and ableist and all these things anyway, right? For others, because of the kind of work they do, they know that if they go in for a half day, they'll be pressured to stay for longer. And so for them, instead of doing like half days every day, they only go back maybe 2 or 3 days per week or even 1 day per week. And then they slowly increase and they really like that. And the same thought for you, right? So maybe you are returning from a hiatus and you could consider modified hours as you go back to work. Maybe you are just like at max work, but you can't really stomach the idea of a whole hiatus. Well, why not graduate yourself without ever having to go off completely? So can you add an extra half day off per month? I don't know, admin day, book a doctor's appointment that then you could totally cancel but not tell anyone, and then you just have the whole afternoon off. Like, could you do that? If you're feeling overworked, if you sense you need more space in your schedule, in your day, in your life, could you take an extra half day off per month? Or if that doesn't feel that appealing or that doesn't appeal to you, could you end an hour earlier each day or start an hour later? I've heard this from actually a couple of people, because at the end of the day, you often then end up doing work anyway. But if you start later, you actually then you have energy to do maybe some top of mind stuff, some more admin stuff that you usually hate getting to at the end of the day, clear your inbox a bit, etc., like at the top of your day. And so could you start an hour later? If an hour later sounds like too much, could you start like 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, like depending on your appointment increments, could you start booking those appointments slightly later? If you work in an environment where it's more about shift work or something, could you spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of your shift doing work that you know is important, that will get swept away in the heat of it, or not come in early and start working early when you're not being paid. Like, how can you sort of boundary the time you're spending working a little bit more? You can set even like stronger boundaries. So your modified hours could be like, I'm committed to never opening my EMR unless I'm in my workplace. And like, so then the hours I'm at my workplace are the hours that I'm spending doing work. And otherwise it'll be there the next time I come into work, right? Like, so different ways you can play around with modified hours. For me, yesterday, because I was feeling still lower energy than I have on a typical day, I added a block to my morning when I saw that it was already quite full and had some patients that I suspected might take longer than the allotted time given to them. So you can add blocks into your schedule just to see if that helps out. And you could take a lunch break, like I said at the beginning. You don't even have to nap, but like simply like take a lunch break, walk away from the screens, walk around the block, like modify your hours in those sorts of ways as well, right? Overall, I'll say, so, speaking to sort of the overall picture for me, I have modified my hours I spend in clinical care. And I feel like, at least for now, for what I have going on in my life, for what my body's telling me, I'm in a pretty good zone, which is that I see patients on average 12 hours per week, sometimes more if I'm on call, sometimes less if there's something that takes me away from work. I then spend, I don't know, maybe an additional 3 to 6 hours. I don't know. Oh, no, because I have a paperwork afternoon. I didn't estimate this before I started talking. I spend some number of hours more still in the clinical place doing non-patient facing work, where I'm doing asynchronous patient visits through my portal, or I'm doing inbox work and all the other work involved, right? So I have a very specific amount of time I spend working, and it is less than I used to. And I feel like it allows me to be working under my capacity, leaving me space for those surge capacities. I've been able to incorporate like palliative home visits, things I was feeling really stressed and unable to do before. And I really love it. So those modified hours can become permanent, by the way. That is how I've learned, if I want the number of patients that I can see on a pretty like regular basis before it starts to feel like I'm pushing through. And I have altered my schedule in order to accommodate that. And there's a million ways, and I've talked about it before, and some of the strategies I've used, like hiring a nurse practitioner, using my team more, that have allowed me to do that in a way that makes sense for me and my business and my life. And I believe there are a million ways you can do it. But really thinking about like pacing, basically, right? So you can modify your hours thinking through like the total number of hours you work and just reducing it. But you can also think of modified hours in a pacing way, where it's like, I know I like to, when I want to work, I want to be full on. So I am going to work for like 2-hour, 3-hour chunks, but then I know I need a break, kind of like a HIIT workout. So you like go hard and then you take a break. Then you go hard and you take a break. That's another form of like modified hours, is like having mandatory breaks. So could you do that too? And this being yet another example of an alternative to completely pushing through. Basically, it means you get to push through for the time that you're on, but then you have time that you are off. And then you go at it hard again. And that can be like the modified hours approach. When you're there, you're really there. And when you're gone, you're really gone. So those are the 3 buckets. That's what I wanted to offer to you as alternatives to the pushing through culture that we see dominate and celebrated in our healthcare system, that in my opinion is having diminishing returns and actually backfiring in a number of ways. If we take these alternatives to pushing through, we actually create a more sustainable version of healthcare for ourselves. And as we start to do this more and model it for each other and speak of it in this ways to each other. So if someone says like, oh, I don't have capacity to do that. One question you could have is like, what do you have capacity for? And if it's absolutely nothing, that's the end of the conversation. If it's like, I would have capacity to do this one piece of it. Interesting. Now that piece hasn't been abandoned. Isn't that cool? Like, we could start talking this way to each other's. Would modified hours allow you to still work here, but at a pace that works better for you? So that's the dream. That's the vision. My question for you, healthcare humans, are you pushing through this week? If you are, that is valid. That is okay. That is an understandable response to how you've been socialized. And Which of these alternatives sounds most appealing to you? What's like a micro version, a micro hiatus, a micro work modification, a micro hour modification that you could commit to this week to see if it helps you feel a little more human? That's my ringtone, so I'm going to go, and I'll talk to you guys next week. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work and healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.